The Institute of World Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee presents International Focus, a weekly discussion of the people and events behind today's global headlines. Support provided by Milwaukee Public Television and the UWM Center for International Education. Now here's your host, Doug Savage.
Welcome to International Focus. As we record this program, Greek voters are set to go to the polls. The anti-austerity Syriza party appears to be holding a lead, reflecting the electorate's frustration with EU-driven policies that have shrunk the economy by a quarter, tripled unemployment, and left many basic goods like medicine in short supply. These tough measures were meted out by Brussels in response to the perception of Greece as a profligate nation. For many people in wealthier countries of the North, like Germany, the Greek economic crisis has a moral dimension, a modern retelling of the fable of the grasshopper and the ant that Aesop himself might appreciate. While the story can be told in the arcane and impenetrable language of European central bank fiscal policy, we'll look today at the cultural context, how Europe's so-called periphery relates, or doesn't, to the core. North versus South, rich versus poor, do the continent's peoples have enough in common to preserve the euro, or even the EU itself? Joining us today for an analysis of the EU's Greek tragedy is Philip Minehan, visiting professor of history at UW-Milwaukee, where his teaching and research focus on Southern Europe. Well, welcome to International Focus.
Thanks very much, Douglas. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm going to start out by giving you a Herculean task, and that's bringing us up to date on Greek history. For many of us, we may have lost track after our study of the Peloponnesian War in high school. So pick a point in the 20th century that you think is sort of illustrative and bring us up to date.
Well, unfortunately, it is typical that Greek history tends to be ancient history and not modern Greek history. And especially now, modern Greek history, in connection with the European Union, with the Eurozone, with the world economy, is going to give us some kind of a lesson about history that will put the ancient history of Greece into a different kind of perspective. That is, the importance of Greek history today is paramount, very much in connection with the issues. I'd like to say right off, Greek tragedy, Greek history, full of drama, just like all sorts of histories are. But the drama, I think, that is going on now with regard to the Greek situation has very much to do with fundamental conflicts between big finance and small d democracy, and not just in Greece, but across Europe and in many other parts of the world, including the United States.
So let's talk about maybe sort of post-juntas. So there was a military junta running Greece for a while.
That's right. Well, in the Second World War, Greece experienced some severe upheavals, including civil war, followed by more civil war. The Greek right, backed by the United States, basically ultimately held on to power for a long time. From 1967 to 1974, a faction of the Greek military established a dictatorship, the so-called dictatorship of the colonels. It was a particular military faction that seized power and used it very brutally for those 7 years. Well, subsequent to that, you still had tendencies toward instability within the Greek political scene, just as there were tendencies toward instability in the Spanish scene after Franco in 1975. Instabilities also within Portugal after the end of their dictatorship in 1974. Already at that point, 1970s, early 1980s, the European Economic Community had been established. It was established in the first place, and with the core institution being the European Coal and Steel Community in 1951, otherwise known as the ECSC. The ECSC was a very serious, extremely pragmatic effort to pool strategic resources and production capacities in coal and in steel, pool those production capacities that you had between the Germans and the French, which enabled them to go to war against each other, of course, and pull in the rest of Europe and the rest of the world along with them, pool those industries so that they either cannot go to war against one another again or make it extremely impracticable. So that core institution of the European Union was created for those strategic reasons, not really for economic reasons. Ultimately, there are economic consequences, of course. But down the road of several years, you then had the establishment of the European Economic Union, which was a way to build up more of an economic community, trade and commerce, free trade zone type of thing between the several members of the group as it stood at that point. So you have the traditional great power states of Europe now engaged together somehow in a common effort to avoid war and to create economic development, economic advantages for all involved. But of course, the great power states remain the great power states. So West Germany, later to be reunified, of course, as Germany, remains a great power state. France remains a great power state. Britain remains a great power state. But the weaker states on the European periphery, on the edges of Europe, including Greece, Spain, Portugal, eventually Ireland, for example, instabilities in those countries easily had pulled in the old imperialist great power states of Europe with serious consequences, including various forms of warfare. So instability on the European periphery posed serious strategic problems for Europe. Well, then let's try to integrate these countries into the European Union so that our project of avoiding self-destruction can be advanced.
So if stability was the incentive on the part of the great powers, Greece, of course, joins the EU in 1981. What would the average Greek say their incentive was to be part of the club?
Mainly economic, but also political, because there was a perception that that the countries could benefit economically from joining in with the European community, as it was called at that time, and then. Also, politically speaking, there were enough people, certainly in each of the peripheral countries that ended up joining, that wanted to get past the era of political instability and dictatorship and such politics, such instabilities.
So 20 years go by. 2001, Greece is among the first wave to adopt the euro. So how was that proposition sold in Greece?
Well, it was marketed quite effectively throughout all the countries that ended up joining the eurozone. The main consideration had to do with a kind of convergence along prices, convergence along business opportunities, convergence along the sort of structural convergence of all the different Eurozone countries, the 10 or 11 originally, and now there are 19 of them, mainly economic and commercial criteria that were accepted by enough people, including some hard interests involved, as being advantageous for all involved. And it speaks to the sort of notion that commerce is the best way to avoid conflict and warfare. Whether or not that's true is another matter, and there's some truth in it, and it's also a problem. But enough people went along with that idea so that it seemed advisable, although somewhat risky. It was recognized as being somewhat risky, but it was basically advisable to go ahead and join in this new common currency zone called the Eurozone.
Well, and to be a member of the club, if you will, there were, at least on paper, certain criteria you had to meet, sort of macroeconomic. Your economy had to be in this kind of shape. And 8 years after Greece joins, in 2009, George Papandreou reveals that probably wasn't the case in Greece, and in fact their deficit was 4 times bigger than they were allowed by EU. So, what did that trigger?
Well, that triggered a lot of politics and frustration and anger on the parts of all sorts of people involved. This revelation that happened in 2009 came amidst the Great Recession, worst economic crisis in the world economy since the Great Depression. Greece got particularly hard hit. The Greek debt skyrocketed. Interest rates in Greece and on Greek loans skyrocketed, and the accusations were flying against the Greek government, but also against Goldman Sachs, that there was a certain collaboration on the parts of those particular parties to essentially cover up the realities of Greek debt. But it got to a point where those realities could not be denied any longer.
And so, and the way this played out in some fronts was basically, as I mentioned in the opening, that there's this perception of somehow they've been living beyond their means, and now it was time for the more sober, responsible parties in Europe to sort of bring them to heel. And so the so-called Troika, the European Central Bank, the European Commission, and the IMF had a package of loans to keep them afloat, but certainly did not come without strings.
Yes, that's right. The anger part of the response against the revelations about Greek debt came especially from people that were inclined to think the Greeks are deceitful, and the Greeks are lazy, and the Greeks are naturally prone to tax evasion. This is old school, unfortunately average garden variety racist nationalist rhetoric that lives, and the way that Greeks were singled out in those regards it was wrong. I mean, throughout any country in the world, there are going to be problems along these lines, problems that you can generally call problems of corruption and tax evasion. In the United States, for example, upwards of 19% of income is estimated to be unrecorded, which involves a tremendous amount of tax evasion and something that amounts to tax evasion in effect. It's just unreported under the table business that's done. And Greece has undeniable problems along those lines, yet it had them for in varying degrees for a long period of time, of course, in its modern history. These things have been a problem. But the other matter is that these things became a very particular issue in the context of the Great Recession, in the context of the overwhelming dominance of big finance, and then they became important in the context of the Eurozone and the EU as well, where Greece now is in a position where it had a tremendous national debt. It became more and more indebted to a number of states, 18 or 19 different states, but among them the great power states of Europe, the French and the German and British banks. They became somewhat something approaching 80% of all the debt that Greece owes now is so-called official debt. It's due to go to the great power states of Europe.
Right. So, well, we'll take a short break, but when we come back, let's talk about what that has done to shape the current political situation in Greece. But first, we'll take a quick break.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back. We're discussing the Greek economic situation with historian Philip Minehan. So, turns out that the Greek economy was in much worse shape than anybody thought. The Troika comes in and bails them out and imposes austerity measures that to the average Greek citizen on the street seem overly harsh, and the unemployment spikes, the economy actually contracts. So now we've got a government that has to face the electorate. The existing government calls a snap election, and so tell us a little bit, set the stage of where we are today.
Well, today, with the elections coming up on Sunday, there is likely to be a victory by the left-wing party called the Syriza party, under the leadership of a man named Tsipras. It's likely that this left-wing political party will get the largest number of votes. It's currently polled at being getting 3% more of the vote than the conservative New Democracy Party will get. And it's possible that the Syriza party will be able to form a majority government within the Greek parliament. It has to get 151 votes out of 300 votes. That is a simple majority in order to form a government. If it does not get that simple majority, it would have to start to negotiate with some smaller parties in order to make a government.
So talk a little bit about their platform and why that makes their creditors a little uneasy.
Well, now, as opposed to 2 years ago, the platform of the Syriza party is against austerity, but it is not to exit the Eurozone. The platform advocates a renegotiation of the debt that Greece owes to the Troika,
and including just some out-and-out write-off of some of the debt.
Yes,
right?
Upwards of 50%, a 50% haircut, as they call it, which makes plenty of people nervous in international markets. But the reality of it is that the Greek debt now is unsustainable for the foreseeable future, and this means decades. That there's no way that Greece is going to be able to pay off the debt that it has ended up incurring unless there is an agreement to write off a substantial part of it.
Well, in fact, the leading candidate you mentioned, Mr. Tsipras, has used the term fiscal waterboarding for the policies towards Greece.
Yeah, the austerity measures that the Troika has imposed upon Greece against the will of the Greek people, because these have been unpopular. The austerity measures have been abusive for many ordinary Greeks. There's been a huge spike in unemployment. Pensions have been reduced. Wages have been reduced by somewhat close to 30%. Unemployment among people between 20 and 26 years old is at 60%. Overall, unemployment is about 26% still. It's been about at that level for a number of years now under austerity. The economic consequences have ruined many people's lives, driven up the suicide rate. There are all sorts of indicators of a tremendous amount of distress that has been created by these austerity policies.
Well, and once again, I mean, the perception, correctly enough, is that these are policies that did not originate within Greece. These are being imposed from elsewhere.
Yeah, and it could not have happened otherwise. As I said, these policies have been imposed on the country against the will of the people for the most part, and any Greek government would not have been able to do this. So there's an example of circumventing democratic politics and democracy. It's just crystal clear. And of course, the priority is given to finance and to the problem of the debt. Well, we have to reduce the debt. We have to reduce the debt, but it's an endless debt. It's an unsustainable debt. Some people not only compare it to economists not only compare it to the German debt that was written off by 50% in 1953, but even to the German debt that was incurred according to the terms of the Versailles Treaty that contributed to the extreme tragedy of the Second World War. So there's a predicament that Greece has ended up in, where finance from the outside has dominated the society, and now by way of what are fortunate options left for some democratic politics, and hopefully they'll be carried out effectively in a democratic manner, that is, so that there's a kind of reversion to democratic politics within Greece, and lo and behold, it shouldn't surprise anyone that there's serious opposition against austerity, and so we're going to see how this plays out. It's possible that the Syriza party will get a majority. It will stick to its guns about renegotiating austerity and be able to restructure the debt quite dramatically. It's possible that they will win and do nothing. They may end up submitting for whatever practical and political reasons. It's also possible that there will be pressures upon Greece to exit the Eurozone. And from Germany, such pressures may come most strongly.
Well, and one of the aspects of that is over the course of the crisis, much of the exposure to Greek debt that was once in private hands has essentially been transferred to public.
That's right.
So the private financial elite no longer have that same level of Greek exposure, so that a Greek default is not as much of a crisis on that front as it might have been.
Yeah, that's an important point. There's more of a cushion now in case of either a Greek default and even a Greek exit. But still, for purposes of the well-being of everybody involved, ordinary people involved within Greece and elsewhere, it would be very important for Greece to go through a controlled exit from the Eurozone instead of a sudden one. And it's not clear right now as to how that would happen, if it would happen at all. And as you had mentioned earlier, there's a sentiment and an interest on the part of a majority of Greek people to stay in the Eurozone, to stay in the EU for sure, but to renegotiate the terms of that relationship. And that is just eminently reasonable to me and I think to many people around the world, and including, of course, many people in Greece.
Well, the head of the IMF opining on this subject recently said, well, a debt is a debt, and you shouldn't expect to just walk away. And there's also this fear of contagion. If we let you get out of your debt, well, what about Spain? What about some of the other countries you mentioned? I mean, is that a real concern, do you think?
I think the term contagion suggests something that gets out of hand and it flares up worldwide. At this point, at least, and maybe even a few years ago, it was also true, but it's more true now that there is a kind of cushion that exists against such an extreme development. It has to do with the way that especially the bigger states involved can absorb that kind of debt, the way that private operators could not have. Beyond that, there's clear reason to renegotiate these debts. They're not exactly rational propositions that they can be paid off. The Greek debt, as I said, is unsustainable. The numbers don't add up in terms of the debt being able to be paid off without a severe haircut.
Well, as we wrap up, our viewers should, if they're paying attention, have some sense of how the election went. So we'll see what happens thereafter. But a fascinating story to keep an eye on. Philip Minehan, thank you very much for being with us. Viewers, we'll see you next time on International Focus.
Thanks very much.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,